Welcome, Wargamers, to the sun-scorched wastes of the mortal realms, because today we are talking about the Blisterskin Court of the Flesh Eater Courts. One of my personal favorite sub-factions. I know I say that a lot. It's because I'm hitting a lot of the hits as I start to redo my sub-faction lore, so it sounds like I'm just repeating that a lot. But in truth, this plays on a lot of themes that I personally really like. And if I was ever going to start a death faction, it would be Flesh Eater Courts, and it would be Blisterskin. Now, do I have plans to do that? Not really, but this is what it would be if I did. This video was requested by, I'm going to try here, J Sampson, I think that's how it's pronounced, and wants to know more about the Blisterskin and the Winged Ghouls. So buddy, we're going to take a look at that today. We're going to talk a little bit about what the Flesh Eater Courts are, because if you're new, you're going to need a little bit of context, so we're not going to go too deep. I do have a whole playlist about them. We're going to kick it off with an exemplary battle, kind of showcasing what makes the Blisterskin so ominous, go into their history, and end this video talking all about why are they cool, what themes are so intriguing about the Blisterskin, and how do they fit within the greater story of the mortal realms. Now, really quickly before we do that, I'd like to give a shout out to Not Just Gaming, a store here in the US that all kinds of savings for GW products, as well as some incredible hobby supplies like Gamer's Grass, Green Stuff World, AK Interactive, Turbo Dork. If your local shop doesn't have it and you'd like to support the channel, please use the affiliate link in the description below, as every single use of it goes directly to supporting me, my wife, our cats, the channel, all of it, and I could not be more thankful for everyone who's used that link already. And so let's kick our discussion off with an exemplary battle straight out of the Flesh Eater Courts battle tome called Darkness Descends. In an attempt to establish a military way station, desert-dwelling free peoples construct the Dune Keep, a fortified outpost in the center of the Reaver Wastes. Duarden masons build enormous walls around the outpost, which are then bound with elven wards and lined with iron-weld artillery, making them more than capable of holding back the Khornate hordes and greenskin tribes of the region. For 2 decades, the Dune Keep stands strong against the marauding warbands, and the corpses of those repelled at its walls are left to bake in the harsh desert sun. Then, over a few short days, vast flocks of carrion birds begin circling above. Their numbers so great they block out the sky. The defenders are shrouded in darkness and deafened by the shrill cawing. But this is only a prelude to the true horror that awaits them. Hundreds of crypt flayers from the Blisterskin Grand Court descend throughout the clouds of vultures, swooping down to rip the Free Guild soldiers from the battlements before turning their attention on those stationed inside the outpost. Against this vertical assault, the Dune Keep's mighty walls only serve to pen the terrified garrison. Now that is a heck of a story. As someone who used to live near a crow roost, like a protected piece of land for crows up in Bothell, Washington, there were thousands upon thousands of crows. The sky would be black with birds cawing at you. It's a super creepy and kind of surreal feeling. So I completely understand what's going on here. Now, I like the idea of, if you don't know, a lot of Akshi is just open plains and baked by sun, dry deserts, all these kinds of things. So to build a fortification out there, you do need tall walls. You got to build something that stands head and shoulders above your enemies, because there's just going to be waves. And they point out Khornate warbands, which I'm sure there are many in the area, but also greenskin tribes just rolling on up. You have to have all kinds of defenses. But the easiest thing to overlook in flat open plains when you can see horizon to horizon is the sky. And so they essentially made a giant, dog food bowl for the Blisterskin. Now, the carrion birds that came are not necessarily like a herald of the Blisterskin, but they are certainly an indicator of the defenders' mistake in leaving all of these bodies out to bake in the sun. Terrible decision. One, because history has told us that that's how disease spreads, so if the Blisterskin weren't going to get him, I'm sure Nurgle would. But the arrival of the birds should have been an indicator to the defenders, we need to get rid of these bodies like now. Because while it may not be, a prelude of the Blisterskin, huge piles of corpses certainly are bait for them. Right? A big old beacon. Come here, Flesh Eater Courts. Enjoy a free banquet. And so the Blisterskin arrive. Now, they do love the use of crypt flayers. These are the flying variants of the Flesh Eater Courts. creatures who have just a little bit of vampire blood and a few mutations in them to sprout gigantic leathery wings, and they can do lightning strikes from the sky. Right where the Free Guild weren't looking. That's about all we can really glean from this particular story, but as we move into the Blisterskin Grand Court lore specifically, we can expand our understanding. Now, I want to give just a few quick bullet points regarding the Flesh Eater Courts. As I said, I have a full playlist about them in the description below. Go click that if you want more. But the surface level is, as the Age of Chaos was going down, good, honest folk from pretty much every faction were displaced. Cities of Sigmar, as we would call them now, but bastions of order would have to flee from their homes because the tides of chaos were coming in, and the marauders came and ransacked their village, and people were refugees, they were running, they were scared, and they were hungry. Some of these folks became so desperate that they turned to cannibalism. Now, what it is about this specific event in a person's life that drove them to this point is ultimately irrelevant. If you partake in cannibalism in the vicinity of a Flesh Eater Court vampire, there is a high probability that you will be sucked into a madness. You see, at the core of it, what the Flesh Eater Courts are is a few vampire lords who are absolutely insane, and they see themselves as these beautiful, noble, regal figures. And when people go insane from, say, desperation and cannibalism, and their minds break in the proximity of these characters, they are locked into the same delusion as the vampire. So your average, Flesh Eater Court ghoul, they're not a vampire, they're just a normal dude who's emaciated and hungry and gross. But because they are joined in a shared delusion and madness with the vampire lord at the top, the Arborant Ghoul King, they see themselves as resplendent and honorable as the vampire sees themselves. And it's a shared delusion. So, for example, if within the delusion, the Arborant Ghoul King elevates a lowly peasant to being a knight, all the other Flesh Eater Courts will see the same thing. So it's like they're all on the same page, it's just that page is super warped. And with this, we have a murderous clan of cannibals running around thinking that they are the heroic knights of legend, heroes of the realms. When they encounter an enemy, they assume that, from the Flesh Eater Court's perspective, they may be more malformed beasts. But in actuality, they're fighting a city of Sigmar of actually good people, and it's the Flesh Eater Courts themselves who are these wretched creatures. That's the broad strokes of what the Flesh Eater Courts are as a faction. But the Blisterskin have their own little, take on this idea. What we know now as the Blisterskin started in the Age of Chaos as a series of tribes and nation-states that revered a sun god. It's not strictly theocratic, but it is noted here that a lot of the nobility were also members of the church, the clergy. And so this collection of nations, again, mostly in the realm of fire, actually, where there is the most sun, it makes sense, revered a sun god to the point where they even sacrificed a third of their crops every single year as offerings to this deity. And just like any other, religious faction or organization, they would send out people to proselytize other nearby nations. In fact, a lot of the actual lore we have, it seems as though the religious elements of, the pre-Blisterskin religion, whatever we want to call that, stretched out pretty far and wide to most of the continents we know from the lore. Well, when the Age of Chaos came and those people were displaced from their homes, right? The Khorne army was sitting outside their walls and they realized they didn't stand a chance, and so everyone fled out the back door basically and tried to escape. Those people, with their own preconceived notions of right and wrong and religion and why things happen and who we go to in times of trouble, all that emotional and mental baggage came with them as they went out into the waste to try and fend for themselves, and they did not do well. Like most people displaced by the Age of Chaos, they're constantly running from warbands who are harrying them. They're hungry, they're tired, and they began to break down both as a society and just as individual people. They didn't have the rich harvests to offer to their sun god, and so they began to sacrifice the young and the old. And as they were sort of slowly losing their minds, an Arborant Ghoul King happened by. Immediately, they were sucked into his fantasy. And when I say it's a singular fantasy, what I mean is they all kind of have the same internal logic as one another. They all see the same delusion. So, when this new huge host of ragged survivors looking for a sun god was absorbed into the delusion of this ghoul king, he became the sun god, a full representation of their deity from the skies. It was to him that they were sacrificing things, and he was their savior, appearing to them as a golden, honeyed-skinned warrior of renown in their darkest hour. They too immediately saw themselves go from being scraggly, underfed refugees to resplendent followers and disciples of the Sun King himself. So they're bought in. And with that, formerly peaceful, sun-worshipping nation-states became the Blisterskin Grand Court. Now, it incorporates any type of religion, whether tribal or, massive theological kingdoms, anything that reveres the sun, basically, at any kind of level. So if your tribe believed things very differently, but still kind of revere the sun, you would obviously just kind of be bought in by proximity. Your beliefs would conform to meet those of the delusion of the Blisterskin. Now, internally, within their delusion, they are, as they were, a theocratic organization bent on the betterment of man and the defense of the mortal realms, all for the glory of the Sun King. They still make sacrifices, they go and they patrol and protect their lands, they send out missionaries. They preach the good word of the sun to anyone who will listen. Now, of course, in reality, the way that this looks is roving bands of madmen grunting about the big fireball in the sky while also mercilessly attacking and assaulting anything they can find and eating it immediately. They are the flesh-eater courts, after all. Where they used to bring blessings and charity and goodwill, now they just horrify anything they go near, because when they accepted the delusion, right, which I'm not even sure accepted is the right word, I don't think it was voluntary, of course, but when it took over their minds collectively, they stopped being harmed by the sun. They were like, oh, our savior's come and he has brought us the power of the sun itself, so we no longer feel the burn and the scourge of the sun. We're now immune. We are now these beautiful, radiant pieces, ones who can stand in the sun all day and never be burned by it, right? Each one of us is a burning bush, a representative of the sun god's power. Of course, in truth, they gained no immunity. Their skin is just boiled and scarred and all kinds of nasty things all over it. Blisters all over the place. Again, they're called the blister skin. Their skin is like this nasty beaten red. If you've seen anyone who's truly survived dehydration and sunburns, like someone who's had a terrible survival event, they look gnarly. It takes a long time to heal from true epic sunburn. And that's just how the blister skin looks. So you might look out and you say, oh, is that a bunch of people like crawling towards us? Do they need food or water? And then you realize it's just a bunch of sunburnt ghouls clawing and scrabbling their way towards you, screaming out. In their minds, they're striding in triumphantly, preaching the good word of their Lord, and in truth, they're just chittering and mumbling to themselves while also ripping the skin off of their victims. And so let's bring this video towards its end by asking, why is this cool? I mentioned before the Blisterskin were my favorite of the flesh-eater courts. Why? To me, I'm just going to share a little bit of my personal life here. I've been on a journey those last few years of kind of walking away from my Christian faith and deconstructing it. And this is a story of faithfulness being hijacked, right? Like almost like what an autoimmune disease does to the body, where it takes the things that are supposed to make us better and twists them into making them enemies, so to speak. Well, in this case, like I said, they hijacked a whole religion based on worshiping a sun god, which is interesting because religion affects so many aspects of our lives, our value systems and our sense of right and wrong, our impetus or motivation for engaging with others, anything from religious crusades to proselytizing, going out and evangelizing your beliefs. It also conforms your sense of history. Religious history is history. So within the context of these people, they might see some lands as quote-unquote belonging to them, when in actuality they were driven out centuries ago. It was owned by Chaos Warlords, and then Cities of Sigmar came and purged those. Well, when the Blisterskin come back and they see people in their land, oh, the infidels have taken over our sacred lands, we need to purge them, now that the Sun God walks among us. So if you're ever looking for motivations for why your Blisterskin army would be fighting something else, it's always there. But also it's our sense of community. And I think that's an interesting one, because as this entire group of refugees descends further and further into desperation and madness, and they're not sure what to do in terms of sacrificing things to their deity, they switch from sacrificing crops to people. That sense of community and how we're all doing this together and buying into things together, I think ultimately is what could lead a larger and larger group of people to succumbing to the madness all at once. Again, it's hijacking your brain, your social standing, every thought of like, well, if they say it, this person of authority, well, then it must be true. All of those things get turned against you. And it's incredibly interesting. And then when you go further and think about how they might have a, what you might call, persecution complex. Anytime someone comes against this grand court, they could perceive it in the delusion of being a religious persecution. Again, filling them with zeal and anger and indignation, because how could people be against us? Our sun god walks among us. We are immune to its radiance. How can they possibly doubt unless they are against us fundamentally? And this all goes into basically explaining why the Blisterskin represent just how bad the realms got, right? They were a great nation state, a theological nation unto themselves, or a collection of them, that was spreading out throughout all continents that we know of actually. But the Age of Chaos brought them to such desperate measures that all it took was the wrong vampire at the right time, or I guess the right vampire at the wrong time, to fundamentally twist an entire nation state's worth of people into becoming these decrepit, sunburnt representations of all the terrible things that actually can do to you if you don't know how to survive. Each one of them looks like a mad sort of zombie that moves a bit too fast and is absolutely decimated by the sun. The heat they worship, turning them into the very monsters that we fear. And for that, I think the Blisterskin are awesome. You know, obviously there's a lot of personal things tied up in there with how religion has twisted them and my own personal journey, but it's the same reason that I love the word bearers in 30k or 40k. It's just themes that speak to me in my life, and I find them intriguing when they're blown into fantasy settings, because things can be like black and white, right? The monster that represents X thing that's haunted me for years has a physical appearance and it can be slain. That's nice. That's a nice thought. But J Sampson, I think that's how it's pronounced. Thank you so much for leaving that comment and a little bit of inspiration for a new faction. If there's anything you would like me to discuss, a sub-faction, a character, whatever, as long as there's enough information to warrant a video about it, I'm happy to do it. So leave it in the comments down below and I'll give you a shout out as well. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I can't wait to catch you next time in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Happy wargaming.